Today we're gonna watch It Chapter 2 Breakdown, Easter eggs, details you missed. Whatever. New rocket? I don't know. What the hell is that?
Did you only redeem our cash rewards once a year, so we saved them up for this.
You two need the BMO Cashback MasterCard. With this, you can redeem your rewards any time of the year.
Thankful birthday, families, and anniversary too. Hey, when rewards are flexible, that's the BMO effect.
Okay.
I'm Eric Boston. It Chapter 2 released a teen trailer following up the first chapter of the 2017 reboot with perfectly cast adult versions of the Losers Club and evoking everyone's greatest fear, roommates forgetting to bring a towel when they shower. Both Stephen King's original novel and Andy Muschietti's remake work so well, largely because these movies and trailers themselves feel haunted, with subtle visual details that are easy to overlook, but then when you spot them, you wet yourself all over again. So I'm going to break down this trailer shot for shot for everything that you might have missed and what to expect in this movie. Now, I will allude to some of what happens in the second half of Stephen King's novel because, folks, it's been about 33 years. But I guess I'll avoid the big twist just in case some of you haven't read it. Be safe, spoiler warning if you haven't read it. Let's get started.
Yes, can I help you? I used to live here. Is it like you remember? Cleaner. Well, you feel free to look around while I get the water boiling. January. My heart burns there.
Okay, this trailer opens with adult Beverly Marsh visiting her old home. Bev is now a fashion designer in Chicago. She's played by Jessica Chastain, and this is really a dream cast. Shortly after the first movie came out, they asked which actors they wanted to play their older selves, and young Bev, Sophia Lillis, actually named Chastain as her ideal choice. Same goes for Richie Tozier, the jokester, now a disc jockey in LA, played by Bill Hader, whom actor Finn Wolfhard named as his dream choice. Rounding out the rest of the club, Mike Hanlon is now a librarian, the only one of the Losers Club to remain in Derry. He's played by Isaiah Mustafa, the hunky Old Spice guy. Bill Denbrough is now a successful horror writer living in England, played by James McAvoy, one of the many examples of Stephen King writing a version of himself into his voice. Then there's the anxious, asthmatic Eddie Kaspbrak. He now runs a limo rental company in New York, played by James Ransome. And then there's Ben Henscom, who's now Ben Handsome. He grew up to be an architect in Nebraska. He's played by Jay Ryan. And Stanley Uris is now an accountant in Atlanta, played by Andy Bean. We'll see if the movie ends up keeping all these careers and locations the same. Now, Chapter 2 is set 27 years later, with the kids as adults returning to Derry to reconfront it and reface the trauma that they all buried as kids. It returns to Derry every 27 years to feed the generational horrific incidents that plagued Derry's past. But anyway, back to this scene with the elderly Mrs. Kirsch. It's one of the most terrifying scenes from the novel. Notice that the door plaque still reads Marsh. We also saw a version of this in the 90s miniseries. When Bev looks back down at it, it changes to Kirsch, but this is all an illusion by Pennywise because this home is actually abandoned. The Marshes were the last residents of it. The wonderful Bill Skarsgård returns as Pennywise in this movie, and if you listen closely, Mrs. Kirsch's voice here is actually his voice when the door first opens.
Yes, can I help you?
As she brings Bev into this home, it's filled with creepy old photographs, which I stared at for way too long. It's interesting that Bev calls this home cleaner, because looking at some of the other shots, Mrs. Kirsch is clearly a bit of a hoarder, but Bev says this because the last time she was in this place, the bathroom was soaked wall to wall and ceiling with blood. That blood still stains the postcard that she digs out of the hole in the wall. This is the same postcard that Ben gave her in part 1 with his secret admirer poem, Your Hair is Winter Fire, January Embers, My Heart Burns There Too. Winter Fire and January Embers are oxymoronic images that Ben used to reflect Bev's warmth and strength in this darkness that they all face. But let's move on to some more scary stuff.
It gets so very hot here this time of year.
It's fine.
Well, you feel like you could just about die.
Okay, in case elderly strangers don't frighten you enough, not because of any ageist reasons, but all strangers are just a bit strange.
Strange?
Mrs. Kirsch does this wacky walk out of frame in the background. right? But it's a dead giveaway that this is actually Pennywise, who often moved in the same inhuman way. The director, Muschietti, is famous for this freaky movement effect, which he perfected in his film Mama. Mrs. Kirsch puts on this old record, and it took me forever, but I figured out that this song is a 1943 Danish song called, now forgive my pronunciation, even though I'm like 50% Danish, and I really should be able to get this, Deja de Skuneste Javud? Again, sorry, but it translates roughly to It Is the Most Beautiful Thing I Know by Max Hansen. Now, I have no idea what these lyrics mean, so my Danish cousins watching this, please help me out. But I will say that this orchestration reminds me a lot of Midnight of the Stars and You, the now creepy, famous 1934 song that played at the end of The Shining. There's just something about old orchestra music that really puts the haunted house vibes on. Bev notices these flies on the window, suggesting something is dead or rotten in its place. Really should be her first red flag to bounce, followed shortly after by Miss Kirsch saying the word die as much as possible. What are you still doing here, Bev? But notice how Bev gags a little when she sips the tea. Book readers know what this water turns into, but for the rest of you, just know it's pretty gross. And on to more grossness.
No one who dies here ever really dies.
What? No.
But tell me, how is it being back in Derry?
I gotta hand it to this actress for nailing the delivery on this frozen smile, and her just shipped back in a chit-chat like nothing happened. But to make it even more unnerving, notice her eyes. There's a very subtle effect here. You might be just looking at this and still not even see it, but each eye is slightly focused in a different direction. Her right eye is on Bev, but her left eye, bulged out a little wider, is on us. This is another Pennywise clue. Remember the opening scene of part 1 when Pennywise was in the sewer talking to Georgie? Bill Skarsgård used this same kind of trick with his eyes that he can actually do, though in that scene it was a lot more pronounced. Anyway, on to the next clip.
Oh, my. My father came to this country with $14 in his pocket.
What did he do, Mrs. Kirsch?
My father joined the circus.
Okay, here a brief flash shows us that Mrs. Kirsch's flesh is actually rotting under her clothes. And then she hurries off to the kitchen to take cookies out of the oven, which hints at another detail from the book. Pennywise is, of course, a shapeshifter, the embodiment of fear itself. And it often takes forms of childhood things that the kids feared the most. Like for Richie, it's an old school clown, but also a werewolf. And for Ben, it's a mummy. The 2017 movie didn't include the werewolf or mummy scenes, just little nods when Pennywise briefly shapeshifts into them late in the movie. But in the book, Bev, in addition to her deep trauma of her father's abuse, fears the witch from the Hansel and Gretel story. So in this scene, Mrs. Kirsch briefly turns into that witch. Her teeth turn into fangs, her cookies contain body parts, but then her transformation gets way darker related to Bev's father, which I think will actually be the direction that this movie goes instead of the witch. Here, Mrs. Kirsch talks about how her father came to this country with $14 in his pocket. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but the number 14 could be significant. Think about it, 7 and 7. 7 kids to kill in chapter 1, 7 adults to kill in chapter 2. And then she says he joined the circus, bringing us to this creepy history in the next clip.
I don't like the part when I saw the trailer. What the hell?
Okay, for me, the creepiest shot of this entire trailer is Mrs. Kirsch silently peeking around the corner at Bev. No audio sting to call attention to it, just out of focus in the background, haunting us forever. It actually reminds me a lot of what I thought the creepiest shot was of the first film. That old lady in the library, in the deep background, out of focus behind Ben, turning to smile at him, and never really addressed by anyone. I'm actually wondering if Pennywise used the same Mrs. Kirsch form in that scene. Bev looks at this old photo of Mrs. Kirsch as a girl and her father, the original Pennywise the dancing clown. Now, in the book, this man is Bob Gray. Robert, or Bob Gray, was an early pseudonym for Pennywise, and the name Bob Gray showed up as an Easter egg in the first movie on that bottle of alcohol. But this movie isn't like revising Pennywise's history. He's still an ancient evil entity. The history we're being presented here is just another detail from the book. It's a false narrative that Pennywise tells Beverly in order to mess with her head and bring up this father-daughter connection in order to trigger her memories of her own father. Actually, looking closely at this photo, in addition to the man's face being distorted to look like Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise, the daughter kinda shares some features with the face of Bev's father. Alvin Marsh, played played by Stephen Boggart in the last movie. The nose is different, but the eyes, the mouth are kind of the same. I don't know, maybe little girls back in the past just looked like adult men. And then, of course, there's Mrs. Kirsch' weird little dance across the kitchen floor. Yes, her nudity is extremely unnerving here, but it's really all about Bev's sexual abuse from her father. Pennywise is deliberately triggering Bev's trauma and her nightmares of her dad in order to get in her head. But on to the next clip.
I was always Daddy's little girl. What about you?
Oh my God.
Are you still his little girl, Beverly? Are you?
Okay, Kirsch rushes at Bev, and the only thing I want to note here is that the framing deliberately does not show Mrs. Kirsch's face, suggesting that the scariest element of this scene is still left a mystery. Will probably be pretty shocking when we see it in the movie. Moving on!
It's me and the Losers Club has officially begun.
We can do this, but we have to stick together.
Okay, this last section of the trailer teases the rest of the film. There's a shot of the adult cast seeing their reflected past selves as children when they return to Derry. They pass the Barrens, which is, of course, the town's sewer drains that lead to its underground lair. You can also see shots of various missing persons flyers reflecting its return 27 years later, now feasting on the next generation of Derry residents. The Losers Club meets in this Chinese restaurant, which is another well-known scene from the novel. It ended in a pretty shocking way. Bill sees the hands of his brother Georgie with his paper boat beckoning him to come down to the sewer, and then Mike Hanlon leads him down the sewer pipes, and then there's a shot of Bill Hader as Richie in the Derry town square reacting to Pennywise floating overhead. But notice behind him here, the townspeople are weirdly frozen, the cheerleaders' pom-poms are unmoving. This is the same location that Richie and the others talked about it as kids in the first movie, and Richie revealed that clowns were his fear, and then he looked behind him at the stage. There was a cloud gesturing toward him, and I think in that one shot, that clown was swapped in with Bill Skarsgård wearing a different costume. So now Richie is reliving that memory of his first Pennywise sighting. The production on the stage behind him is the story of Paul Bunyan. Just like the big statue that Richie's facing, that statue is a nod by Stephen King to the real-life 31-foot-tall statue of Paul Bunyan in Bangor claims to be Paul Bunyan's birthplace, and the statue's just a bit creepy. On to the last clip. Okay, here you can see the adult Mike with a slingshot, which is a weapon that the characters use against it in the book. Actually, if you watch the show Stranger Things, which also stars Finn Wolfhard, the character Lucas uses a slingshot against the Demogorgon, which is one of the many Stephen King nods in that series. There's also this shot of like hundreds of red balloons floating out from under the bridge with a carnival in the background. This location is also pretty significant from the book. There's one Derry resident named Adrian Mellon, who's a gay man who gets beaten up by some homophobic kids and thrown off a bridge on the way home from the carnival. Below this bridge, Pennywise finds him and mutilates his body, which the gang and Adrian's boyfriend witness. But this clown sighting was covered up by the prosecutors in the trial. Another shot shows Mike looking up at Pennywise jumping out from a vent on the wall, doing a little dance. This building appears to be burned ruins, suggesting that this could be the Black Spot, the black dance club in Derry that was burned down by racists. The kids actually passed the Black Spot in the first movie, and Mike in particular has this childhood trauma of fire with his parents dying in a fire. Then there's this shot of a man in Pennywise-style clown makeup, but I don't think this is Pennywise. Rather, this could be Henry Bowers, the sadistic bully kid from the first movie whom Pennywise hypnotized. Remember, Mike pushed him down a well in the movie, but in the book, Henry Bowers goes on to take the fall for all of Pennywise's murders. And as an adult, it continues to puppet Bowers against the Losers Club in part 2. But the insanity of the shot is just so hard to look at. I love the...
Okay, this. Oh my. Okay, good news and bad news. Well, just good news. My health. Okay. And the thing is, this face is horrifying. Is it dead Henry Bowers? Like he said.
Detailed the paint smeared onto the fingers, which is a similar makeup choice to what we saw Heath Ledger do as the Joker in The Dark Knight. He was also a sadistic killer who would have applied his own makeup, so they made sure to have paint caked on his fingers and his fingernails. There's more shots of the Losers exploring its underground lair, and adult Bev drowning in blood, as one does. And then there's a shot of them joining hands, similar to the final scene in part 1. Stephen King, who has admitted to using a lot of cocaine when writing his books in the 80s, goes to some really weird places in part 2 of the book. Lots of dealing with cosmic rituals and giant giant turtles. I will be really interested to see if Chapter 2 even tries to adapt that stuff. But right at the end of this trailer, there is this tiny light, which Pennywise cups with his hands as a young girl is drawn in. This same light appeared in the first movie. There were 3 of them deep inside Pennywise's mouth. They are called the Deadlights. In King's novels, a mere glance at a deadlight is supposed to cause death or permanent insanity. But when Bev looked at them in the first movie, she was just merely hypnotized, started floating, Ben had to kiss her to break her out of her trance. But the Deadlights are the very essence and true form of it. They're actually how the monster consumes people's souls. So by showing us a deadlight here in the trailer, it looks like this will become a major plot point in part 2. Comment down below with what the scariest moment of this trailer was for you. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at EAVoss, and subscribe to New Rockstars here on YouTube for more breakdowns of everything that you love. Thank you for watching.
And bye.